Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the On the Pony Express podcast. I am Billy Embody. Thanks for listening. Look, I want to start off by saying thank you guys for all of those who have subscribed to the channel over the last few weeks. Please hit that subscribe button before we jump into today's podcast. If you have liked what you've heard over the last few weeks, we are aiming to hit that 1,000 subscriber mark here by the end of spring ball. So help us out. But on to spring ball now for SMU, as the Mustangs are now in just a few days away from being back on the practice field. Thursday, March 2nd, this week, the Mustangs will take the field for the second spring practice under Rhett Lashley's direction. And look, I want to kick off this week by sharing, a lot of thoughts on storylines. Who are the players I want to see the most? What are the biggest question marks in spring? What are some of the breakout or overlooked players that we're going to get a chance to lay eyes on and they'll have a chance to make a statement this spring? Those are what we're going to talk about today on the podcast. Obviously, we previewed the linebacker position last week, and we will preview the wide receiver and tight end room just in time for the start of spring ball. We'll drop that one a day early than normal, dropping it on Thursday. But I did want to spend pretty much this whole podcast talking about SMU spring practice. We'll go through more and more on this as we get an opportunity to actually get on the field. But this is like one of your final preview podcasts, right? So let's jump right in. The players I'm most looking forward to seeing this spring. And I limited myself to 6. So it ended up that there were 3 on each side of the ball. It wasn't on purpose that it happened that way. But I do want to lead off with a guy that I think you could almost categorize him as a little bit of an overlooked player. But I want to go with Jake Bailey. This is somebody that last year was really on a tear for SMU when he got hurt. And that was a big deal to the passing game when Jake Bailey went down. He was somebody that SMU really loved in the slot. A lot of you, if you followed closely, knew that he was one of Preston Stone's favorite targets just in general, as far as when he got there and when he started to produce and do all of those things with SMU. He really, was a big loss when he went down, for SMU. So he went off against TCU, 8 catches, 160 yards, 163 yards and a touchdown. Also had 4 catches for 42 yards against Maryland. But ultimately, he redshirts instead of being able to play out the rest of the season. And I think when you look at this offense with them adding Keyshawn Smith and having Jordan Curley back and Moochie Dixon back, and we'll certainly talk a lot about some of those guys. The factor that I'm watching closely is Jake Bailey's impact. When you have RJ Maryland also out there, who's kind of able to be moved around, Jake Bailey's that slot that man beater, zone beater, however you want to put it. He is a player that, SMU can really use in different ways. And I think with his speed, he's going to be really fun to watch. So I'll lead off with Jake Bailey, a returning player who, certainly had a lot of his first season at SMU lost to injury. Then I'll go with a bunch of transfers, quite honestly. And the one I lead off with is Jalen Knighton. He is really somebody that, getting a chance to watch more and more of his tape, I'm excited to see what he can do in spring practice, returning to this offense. He can catch the ball out of the backfield. He showed that, a lot at Miami. And I think that's an exciting thing to look at, when it comes to what Jalen Knighton can bring to the table. I just feel like he's explosive, and I want to see him in person. I want to see that happen. I saw LJ Johnson a lot in high school. We've seen Kamar Wheaton, but, I haven't seen Jalen Knighton in person. I want to see what he can do for this SMU offense. And then, lastly, on the offensive side of the ball, Lonnie Johnson, kind of an under the radar pick here, but, with his size, I just am excited to see kind of how they move him around, where he's at physically. Obviously, you could have picked Jackson Lavender, but I saw a lot of Jackson. I know what they're getting in him, an explosive slot and return man. But when you look at Lonnie Johnson, he's somebody that lost most of his senior season to injury. He ended up getting, I believe it was a shoulder, cleaned up and started getting ready for SMU. So if he's ready to go and able to compete, which I think he is, that's going to be a player that I want to see, because you have RJ Maryland coming back. And if Lonnie can really, add that weight and make a statement in that regard with his play, he could be somebody who could be on the rise as far as potential playing time at the tight end position as well before they, eventually add a transfer. So this is a big spring for Lonnie Johnson. If he can pick up the offense quickly, if he can show some of the traits that they liked when they went out and saw him and really turned up the heat on him recruiting wise, this could be a big spring for him. I flip over to the defensive side of the ball. I really want to see Jordan Miller. I've heard just how big he is, how strong he is, and I want to see him be a player that can really take over in the middle. And look, we talked on the Position Battle podcast last week that we won't be seeing, the end of the left guard and center competition and some of the other position battles along the offensive line. And that's because, Logan Parr and Ja'Kai Clark will still be coming this summer. But I want to see how Branson Hickman, I want to see how Ben Sparks and some of these returning guys, Justin Osborne, handle how big of a dude Jordan Miller is in the middle. And I want to see him be productive too. I think that's something that'll be important to kind of set the tone for this defense, is if Jordan Miller can have, lack of a better term, kind of a breakout first spring here and really show what he can do and show how he's going to change this defense. Then I move into the secondary, and two players that I'm ready to see for two very different reasons. And I look at Jalen Davis Robinson. He redshirted at LSU last year. I saw him in high school. I saw him right before he went off to LSU, and he had bulked up considerably. I want to see where they play him. I want to see his natural speed. I want to see him play with confidence. I think at LSU, he was starting to turn the corner as far as on-field play, and Brian Kelly really talked him up. And just for full disclosure, we don't see practice during the season at LSU, but they don't let us in. But as far as Brian Kelly talking him up, that said a lot. So you factor in his speed, you factor in his size. He's been in a college weight room for a year. I really want to see how he does this year. Charles Woods is somebody we're going to watch, see how he's healthy. Chris Megginson, he's coming back to a defense that he's very familiar with. He's played a lot of football. All of these guys in the secondary have played a lot of football, but Jalen Davis Robinson hasn't yet at the college level. So I'm excited to see what he does and how he puts it together in the spring, because that's a wild card kind of transfer edition for SMU. You added two guys who played a lot of football in Charles Woods and Chris Megginson at corner, and you bring in Jalen Davis Robinson, who played corner at LSU. Now you're kind of playing with house money. If you get a lot out of him this year, that's huge. Same story with AJ Davis, the way he came on last year. And we'll talk about him in a bit. But I'm excited to see Jalen Davis Robinson. I haven't seen him in person since, he was just about to go off to LSU. So he could be kind of one of those guys that makes a splash this spring. Jonathan McGill is my final pick. And I mean, this is kind of one of those stories that goes back years and years as a recruit out of Coppell. And obviously we were very familiar with Jonathan and his, path to Stanford, and then ends up being a captain. And now he's coming back to the DFW area to play out his final 2 years of college football. This is, he has the potential to be a game changer, not only on the field for SMU, but as far as leadership and showing these guys how to do it. They brought in Ahmad Walker. They brought in Chris Megginson. Those are some of the guys that they are bringing in from the standpoint of these guys know this defense. They know how the staff wants it to go. But Jonathan McGill is just a pro. And I think the way he interacts and the way he leads that safety room with Scott Simons now back there coaching it is going to be very critical to how this defense looks in spring. And, one thing Scott Simons told me is, look, Jonathan McGill has not stopped calling. He's not stopped, trying to learn and be ready to go. And that was obviously before he actually got to SMU. But now he's the same guy. He's in there all the time, looking at film and trying to learn that defense. So he's trying to be ready to go. I'm interested to see how he leads that secondary, because he is a natural leader. He is a football player, as Rhett Lashley called him at the National Signing Day celebration they had. And I think, it's been a long road to finally get to see Jonathan McGill play for SMU. So he's a guy that I'm excited to see. When I look at the breakout candidates and some overlooked names that aren't talked enough about, in my opinion, going into spring, I wanted to share three on this one. And I lead off with Moochie Dixon. And the reason I say Moochie Dixon is you have Jordan Curley coming back. Everybody knows about Keyshawn Smith and Romello Brinson coming into the program. They brought in, a lot of high school signees. And then they have Jake Bailey coming back off injury. I mentioned Jordan Curley earlier. But now you have Moochie Dixon, who kind of came on a little bit late in the year, and they really liked what he was doing from a production standpoint and really buying in. It took a minute. It took a minute to get Moochie to kind of not necessarily buy in, but just do it the way that Rob Likens wants it done. And that's just a reality. I mean, it's hard. You transfer in, it's your first season. It's Rob Likens' first season, but he played in all 13 games, which I think says a lot about him. Finished with 28 receptions, 378 yards, and 3 scores on the year. When I look at what he's able to do for this offense, I think he's got the chance to really turn the corner this spring and kind of make some waves. I really do. And call me crazy. I just think he's got that ability, that natural ability to be playing at the highest level as far as SMU's overall receiver group. Like I don't think he's a talent drop off from Jordan Curley. I don't think he's a talent drop off from Jake Bailey or Keyshawn Smith. I think he's got the talent. And so if he can continue to progress, he has a chance to break out and really, not necessarily reinvent himself by any means, but give people that buzz back that they heard about when he came out of Carthage and when he went to Texas and then when he transferred to SMU and the buzz around him coming in. He's somebody that I think is not talked enough about in the grand scheme of the wide receiver room. So I'm interested to see how he fits in. Another player is Ben Sparks on the offensive line. We know Logan Parr and Ja'Kai Clark are coming in this summer. We know they'll both have something to say along the offensive line, and maybe somebody like PJ Williams battles along the interior, but Ben Sparks has waited his turn. He's waited his turn a long time, and I think he's going to come out with a very strong spring. He was somebody that was really pushing late in the season, and they started to see more out of. I think it's time to turn him loose. He's going to get plenty of reps at left guard, and I think for Ben Sparks, this is a massive spring. And you talk about bringing in Hiron White and PJ Williams and Logan Parr and Ja'Kai Clark, and you have Marcus Bryant returning, and you have Justin Osborne returning. But I just look at Ben Sparks, and he's just kind of steadily progressed throughout his career. And I think this is the spring that he stakes his claim to that starting job so that it's at least on steady footing heading into the summer before the transfers arrive. So I'm looking forward to see him play. He's very competitive, very tough. And I think, the door's open for him to really stake a claim to that starting job. And then finally, AJ Davis is entirely overlooked. Charles Woods comes in, Chris Meganson comes in. We talked about Jalen Davis Robinson, but AJ Davis has really impressed this staff. And if you're at the National Signing Day event and in talking with sources around the program, he is somebody that just works his tail off, is tough, is physical, is chippy in a good way. He just doesn't really take anything from anyone. And the only thing he's trying to take is playing time. And he's locked in on football. And I think that's important. I think he's done a really nice job coming on late in the season. He got more and more time as the season went on, and he earned it. And Ricky Hundley rewarded him for it. I think they're very high on him and what he's going to do. But with the transfer additions and even throughout the whole secondary, that is a player who I would say is looking like he's overlooked. And I think he's going to show people this spring that he is not to be overlooked. He can be maybe even in the starting pair of corners. Maybe out opposite Charles Woods. Maybe he can find a way to beat out Chris Meganson. I know those are two veterans, but AJ Davis is really doing his best to make a claim that he can be a starter. I think at the very least, you're looking at him being in the two deep. As far as who makes the biggest splash in spring ball, and this question actually comes from our mailbag edition questions. Beacon's Pony or BK In's Pony asks who's going to make the biggest splash. And I think there's two parts to this. There's who is a really strong football player that you think is going to have a great spring. And then there's who's going to make the biggest splash and have people talking about him all the time. And I think the biggest splash player is probably going to be, if I had to guess, it's probably going to be Ahmad Walker. I just think he's got that speed, and in spring practice, and he's got the understanding of the defense. I think he's going to be able to fly around, and I think he's going to have people talking about him in a big way. That's the long and short of it. And he's been productive. He's started for Scott Simons. There's a respect from Scott Simons for Ahmad Walker that, you could tell he's excited to have him back on the team. And then biggest splash as far as, maybe making a move. I kind of want to lean toward, lean towards Hiron White, the Missouri right tackle transfer. I think people look at him and he missed last season, but he's healthy now. He's a massive human, and he's gotten a lot of buzz from the coaching staff as well. So I'm going to go with Hiron White being the one that, really says, wow, all right, they've found their right tackle for next year. And he's not, a revolving door. He's going to be steady. He's going to be huge. He's going to help in the run game. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But, I pick Hiron White to make a huge splash. And if he jumped in a pool, he'd absolutely make a big one as well with his, frame in general. So the back half of this podcast, the biggest questions for SMU that need to be answered in spring ball. I think one thing with spring, and I want to lead off of this because we've been far enough away from the season that it's kind of died down, but tackling. And talking to sources, this is going to be a spring that they push the physicality, they push the tackling. And if that's the case, I really want to see it get better. And I want to see how they do that. And when you look at adding Maurice Crum and moving Scott Simons back there, those are two position groups that struggled the most. And in the linebackers case, they certainly have very little depth right now there. So they're going to have to step up and show what they can do. That whole defense has to improve on tackling. And we won't know until the season starts. We won't know what it looks like and how well they did at trying to piece it together. But that's what they've got to do. They've got to work on tackling. And it's just a reality. They were that bad last year. So, I trust SMU is going to be more physical this spring. They're not going to be teaching as much. Obviously, they'll have new players, but they'll have enough players that have been through it all to kind of go at a little faster pace, throughout spring. But this is a group that has to work on tackling. And it's a question that won't necessarily be answered, but I think for those of us who have watched years and years of practice, I want to see a lot more emphasis on tackling drills, being physical, and I'm interested to see how they can accomplish that in spring ball. The next one for me is developing pass rushers. I think this is something that SMU has to continue to push for. You have a group that includes a Nelson Paul, a veteran pass rusher on the edge. And then you have guys like Jaden Jones, Jalen Samuels, Isaiah Smith, still relatively young players in that mix. And I feel like it's a group that has to improve as far as getting after the quarterback and not only getting after the quarterback, but containing, getting them down, not allowing them to escape. I want to see that pass rushing ability and pass rush discipline improve in a big way this spring. Preston Stone can move around. Kevin Henry Jennings can move around. Alex Padilla's got some ability to extend too. But when it comes to pass rush, I want to see them be able to get off the line of scrimmage, add to their moves, get some pass rush, get some pressure on the quarterback, but also contain. Don't let things break down and allow either Stone or whoever to scramble for yardage and continue to move the chains or what have you. But I just feel like pass rush is a big one for me, and it's a good time to work on skills and developing that pass rush and just continuing to add to that craft. Finally, on the offensive side, got two for you. Run blocking, run blocking overall is something that I really want SMU to continue to show some improvement on. I feel like that's an area that they just didn't have enough push overall this past year until they kind of, I don't know what they did. They just settled in. They figured it out a little bit. But I just feel like it's a the trait that last year's offensive line was not the best at or most consistent at. Pass pro was terrific last year. I mean, Tanner Mordecai, Preston Stone, whoever was back there had plenty of time to go through progressions. Um, and I think this is a good time to really push that envelope. And it comes with having depth now, I would say, on the defensive line that can make you better. Battling Jordan Miller, Elijah Roberts, Elijah Chapman, Devere Levelston, Jaden Jones, Nelson Paul, David Abiara. I mean, they've got guys on that defensive line that they can be ready to roll with as far as just battling in terms of the run game and cleaning up some of the things that SMU struggled with early in the year in the run game. One thing that is somewhat forgotten in all of that progression the run game showed in the middle and back half of the season is they played some defenses that weren't as good as the ones they played early in the year. I mean, UCF was one of the best defenses. TCU always has that weird style. Well, now TCU does with Joe Gillespie there, but has that weird style that makes it tough to run on. And then, they just weren't able to, always put that together. They played a more athletic group in Maryland. I just feel like some of what they were able to accomplish in the run game was a little bit also because of the opponents they played. So I want to see just that overall run game continue to improve. I think it starts with the run blocking. You have the talent up front with this offensive line, and it'll only get better in the summer when Logan Parr and Ja'Kai Clark come in. Maybe they find another offensive line transfer to add in there. But I feel like this is a really critical spring for the run blocking scheme and development of SMU's offensive line. So I want to see that improve. And finally, who's next at tight end? That's one that we're going to continue to look at as spring turns into fall camp. But you did add Lonnie Johnson into the fold. They do have Simon Gonzalez, Nolan Matthews-Harris. They have multiple guys back in that room to battle with RJ Maryland. What can they come up with in the spring? And that may be a question that isn't answered until fall camp if they can add a graduate transfer into the fold. But I just think that that's a group that I want to see more of in terms of just trying to get them ready. I mean, you can't really get in the way or you can't help players that aren't necessarily willing to help themselves. Like we haven't seen it from Simon Gonzalez. We haven't seen it from Nolan Matthews-Harris yet. Cam Allen didn't show much last year. The only one that did was RJ Maryland. So you've got to find a way to get that group ready to go and just keep pushing them because they are a group that I think that group in a way behind RJ Maryland really let this team down last year. I think if someone was able to put something together they would have been a little bit different, maybe in the run blocking, maybe just a different option in the pass game here or there. But, I feel like this is a group that really just it's time for them to step up a little bit and get it right. Finally, one key question. Preston Stone, he broke that collarbone, had that surgery. He's back in workouts. It looks like he is going to be cleared and ready to go for spring ball. But how does he look? How does he look throwing the football? Is there any discomfort? Are they watching his numbers as far as mileage on his arm? I think one of the things Preston Stone always wants to do is work his absolute tail off. And I think taking a little bit of time and maybe being on a pitch count is not a bad thing for him because he's played a ton of football over the course of his career. We know that dating back to high school. Obviously, he got a little bit of a rest in his first year on campus. And then this past year, he was the backup and certainly saw some extended time. But I think coming off that injury, you just want to be careful. I think to answer one of our mailbag questions from Abide Dude or Dude Abide, I would say is Preston Stone the day one starter, or is there going to be a quarterback competition? And right now, I just don't see a quarterback competition. Just I hear more and more about, it's Preston's turn. Obviously, they're going to have competition. They're going to continue to compete. But Preston Stone is, he earned that backup job over Kevin Henry Jennings. He was off to a good start before he got hurt. He played, made some great plays last year. He also made some, throws that he would want back. I think that interception, I think it was against Lamar. He wasn't perfect, but he showed the upside. He showed the talent level that he's got. So for Preston Stone, I think he's somebody that now that injury is behind him, you want to make sure that he is all healthy and ready to go. And so that is probably one of my biggest points that I'm watching this spring is how does Preston Stone look coming off that injury? So with that, I feel like you guys are ready now with some of the biggest questions and breakout predictions as far as spring practice goes, which starts on Thursday. We get access as of now on Saturday, March 4th, for our first look at the Mustangs in spring ball. So please check out on theponyexpress.com. Keep hitting that subscribe button to our YouTube channel, and we will catch you guys later this week with much more coverage of the Mustangs, as well as talking some SMU hoops as well. So please subscribe to ontheponyexpress.com and also hit that subscribe button to our YouTube channel and get ready for spring ball. It's almost here, everyone. Thanks for listening to this edition of the On the Pony Express podcast.